Welcome to Leading Questions. I'm Kayla Theeuwen.
And I'm Megan Mah, and we're lawyers at WeirFoulds. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, welcome. Leading Questions is a web series where we answer some of your burning questions about law, business development, and professional development. Today, we have a special edition for all of you students who are participating in the law firm recruitment process for summer student positions.
With virtual in-firm interviews just around the corner, we're hoping to answer some burning questions about how best to prepare for those interviews. We're joined today by 4 of our 2021 summer students who are pioneer candidates of the virtual recruitment process. They were the first to go through it earlier this year, and they are obviously very well positioned to offer some tips on how to succeed. So without further ado, let me briefly introduce you to Taiwo, Onabolu, Dalal Hjjih, Jordan Crocker, Rapti, Ratnayake, and I'm obviously here with my colleague Megan. So let's get into it.
Perfect. So our first question is for Taiwo. Can you share some of your top tips for the in-firm interview process in this new virtual world?
Sure, no problem. My top tip that I would give would be make sure that you research the firm ahead of time. And that would include the interviewers that you're interviewing with, the specific practice groups that the firm offers and the ones that you may be interested in, as well as anything that the lawyer or any person that you're interested in is either publishing or the works that they've done beforehand. Because nothing is more embarrassing, I would say, than not knowing who your interviewer is or the specific practice group that they work in when answering a question or when asking a question. Because if there are questions that you do ask and it's something that can be found on the website, it can show that you haven't done your research. So I would ensure that you are reaching out to summer students or articling students before all this, because this is what you can find on the website. And it would give you great information on what they've done in the summer student program, or even during articling, that again, may not be found on the website, but will also be very helpful when you're doing your interviews and for preparing for any questions that you may ask. Also, again, something that I should have done more thoroughly during my interviews was read the bios of the people you expect to meet, because there may be some tidbits that may be useful for you or things that you can communicate on. For example, they may have gone to the same school that you went to. They may have played a specific sport that you played as well, or have the same interests that you may have as well that you can connect on as well. So these are also as important as well as the rest of the things that we will talk about today.
Great, thanks, Taiwo. And from the interviewer's perspective, it is really important to know who you're talking to. And I'm always really impressed when people have done their research and they've done those searches and they've read up on the bios like you mentioned.
Completely agreed with all of that. So switching gears, we're going to talk to Dalal. Dalal, you obviously succeeded in this process. What can you share with prospective students about your top tip for preparing for these interviews?
Yeah, so my top tip would be to know your resume. So the reason you want to do this is that you want to touch on a variety of your experiences when you're answering questions. You don't want to stick to like one job or volunteer opportunity. You really want to showcase your skill set amongst a variety of the items on your resume. You also want to be sure that you're reviewing your skills and interests section, because you have to be prepared to answer questions about them. They are part of your resume, so they are fair game, and you have to know them really well. You also want to go over every item on your resume. So the way you can do this, like a quick trick, would be to take your resume, and then I would delete all the bulletin points that you have and then put down instead maybe a story that you would like to share about that specific item on your resume. And so that way, when you're practicing, you're kind of aware of what you're going to be discussing for that certain experience or job opportunity. And as well, you can ensure that you're touching on various skills and accomplishments throughout. And you also want to practice to the point where you're prepared for the interview, but you don't want to sound like you're reading off a script. So it's a fine line between memorizing and sounding a little robotic. You also want to, throughout knowing your resume, you want to ensure that you're highlighting the values that you would bring to the firm.
Yeah, all good tips. I know I've interviewed some students who they do lean towards, being overly prepared and overly scripted, and that doesn't always really work. It just doesn't seem like you can engage naturally about your own resume, and nobody knows your resume better than you. So you just have to take the time to really get to know it in depth so that you can talk about it very easily in the interview.
Yeah, definitely a difficult balance to kind of go from canned versus, being natural in the moment. So Jordan, moving to you, what about you? Any tips to offer to some of the students who are going through this process right now?
Yeah, thanks, Megan. I mean, Dalal and Taiwo took a couple of good ones. I will also then, I think what I would advocate for actually on that, and the top tip that I would have is to make sure that you have a support network. That especially in a virtual interview process, it's so difficult for connections to be made. And those connections can be with family. I know my family was a big part of how I was able to succeed in the process because they're not lawyers. I was able to talk with them about what was going on, and they were able to provide an outside perspective and keep me grounded a little bit in that process because it is difficult to go through alone. So would never advocate to go through alone if you can. I think another way the networking is able to help out is for mock interviews, right? That's half of what I did for preparation was mock interview, just so that you get a feel for what it's going to be like. There's already been OCIs, in-firms are also another set of the interview questions, right? So that network is really important to reach out to and ask your mentors, ask upper years who have gone through the process to help you out. I thought those were the best tips that I could give.
Thanks so much, Jordan. And I think that's a really great point that you made about having the support network, and something that we don't really talk about enough. Like, this is a very stressful process, and it's a weird process to go through, unlike any other job recruitment process in other industries. So it is important to have that support network, like you mentioned.
And the mock interview is such a good suggestion. I think too, I'm hearing a lot this year in particular about how some firms for the OCIs are doing standard questions for all students, but at the in-firm stage, it's a little bit more flexible. So the type of interview that you're going to have is going to be a bit different. So getting prepared with a mock interview for an OCI versus an in-firm, I think would probably serve you very well. Okay, last but not least, Rapti, what knowledge have you got to bestow on prospective candidates?
Well, everyone's already shared a great deal of information. I think my top tip is to prepare really good questions. At the end of every interview, the interviewer will open up the floor, and that's really an opportunity for you to find out more about the culture of the firm, the practice groups, and any sort of questions that are lingering on professional and personal interests. I think it's the best way to put your foot forward, to form a connection with your interviewers, and to really try to understand the nature of the summer program. As a first recommendation, I would say prepare a really strong list of questions at the start before any interviews. The second recommendation goes to a lot of what Taiwo discussed. Really make sure that you're not asking questions that can easily be found on the website. It could come across as a little sloppy, so really try to find very targeted questions. I would say if you're lucky enough to know who your interviewer is, do a lot of background research, try to tailor those questions, try to form a point of contact and discussion. And also another possible recommendation is differentiate your questions depending on whether you're speaking to an associate or a partner. Presumably an associate has been through the process somewhat recently and could give you a sort of more in-depth idea of their transition through summaring to articling to finding their practice groups, while a partner might be somebody who could give you more of an oversight of the firm, the practice groups, the type of work you would get involved with, and the delegation of work at the firm. So prepare really well, prepare good questions, and be ready to discuss them.
Yeah, all very helpful suggestions, Rapti. I think it is important to keep in mind that the questions that you ask serve two purposes. They're information gathering for you, but I think they're also a way for you to demonstrate to a firm that you are actually interested in working there, that you developed a connection with some people, or that you've learned a lot about what the firm is doing. So the question that you ask your interviewers is really important, both for you and for the firm. All right. Well, thank you so much, Taiwo, Dalal, Jordan, and Rapti. I think this was super helpful. I wish I had had a resource like this when I was going through the process all these years ago. So thank you, everybody who has tuned in to listen to these wonderful tips. We're doing a second episode in this mini series for student interviews. And in that second episode, we've got some other summer students who are talking about their tips for the virtual interview itself and some post-interview considerations. So stay tuned for that. Thank you, everybody, and see you next time.
And if you have any other questions or topics that you'd like us to address in future episodes, please email us at leadingquestions@weirfolds.com. All the best in the interview process, and see you next time.